A mystery monster.
Don't move.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Flix Files. I thought I would start a new playlist on my channel and talk about various science fiction movies that I've loved over the years. And there are a lot of them. So it's a lot of films to talk about. And it's a case of, well, which movie do I do first? Which film should I talk about first? Shall I do them in chronologically, with the oldest first? But I didn't need to think about it very long. I think that the first film I'm going to talk about is a film from 1979 called The Black Hole. And the reason I kind of gravitated towards this is it was originally going to be one of my guilty pleasure videos, in that it's a film that I adore, but, not many people do. But I thought, no, I'll make this the first one of my science fiction series of videos, because it is a film that I've always loved. And there's a lot about it that I really like that hopefully I'm going to try and get across in this video. So this was made by Disney a few years after the Star Wars phenomenon. And a lot of people, probably rightly, assumed that this was Disney's way of throwing their hat into the ring and saying, okay, you 20th Century Fox have got Star Wars, but we've made The Black Hole, there you go. And they put a lot of faith in this movie. At the time, it was the most expensive movie that Disney ever made. And another interesting fact with The Black Hole was that it was the first Disney movie that was a PG, because of one particular scene in it that I'll talk about in a little while. And I saw this movie when it was originally released. Yeah, I'm that old. And it was released in the UK in December of 1979. And I would consider it one of my earliest cinema memories of going to see this movie. This and Star Wars and Close Encounters. And I think my memories of this film are particularly clear because at the time that it opened in our local cinema, which, by the way, anyone that's watched my introductory video will know that I talked about I had an aunt that ran our local cinema. So as a result, we got in to see a lot of movies for free. It was excellent, and I never took it for granted, but it was fantastic. And when The Black Hole opened, the cinema had an issue with the floor on the ground floor. It was one of those cinemas that had a ground floor and it had an upper balcony. And in the late 70s, they had a problem with moisture subsidence coming from under the ground. And they were having work done on the ground floor. And I remember when me and my dad went to see The Black Hole, that my aunt said, well, look, you can sit downstairs, but obviously be very careful when you find in your seat because it might be a bit slippy. And we thought, oh, great, we'll do that because we'll be the only two there effectively on the ground floor. And so I sat right at the front as a little kid would, and my dad sat right at the back. And I can remember the feeling of sitting down and feeling like we had the whole cinema to ourselves. But above us, we could hear the faint murmurs and, noises of members of the public in the upper gallery. And it's a very clear memory that I have. And at certain scenes in the movie, I kept turning around to make sure my dad was still there because I was a bit scared. So, what is it about this movie that I like so much? There are a number of things. I think first and foremost, much like with my favorite film of all time, Alien, I really love the atmosphere and the feel of this movie. It takes about 20 minutes for the actual plot to really start rolling in this film. So, many people might be put off by that and think that the beginning's rather slow, but I'm not. I think it takes its time to build the atmosphere and the feel of the film. And the movie starts where we see a little starship called the Palomino traveling through space. And on board, there are 5 crew members and a robot. And the cast in this movie are really well picked. It's a good ensemble of actors. We have Robert Forster as the captain, who's possibly my favorite character in the film just because I like his stoicness. You know, he's very American. He's like the Captain America of the Palomino. And then we have Joseph Bottoms, and I think his character's called Charlie Pizer, and he's like the lieutenant. And then we have Yvette Mimieux, who's sort of I think she's the medical doctor. I might be wrong, but she has a telepathic connection with the ship's robot called Vincent, which is voiced by the wonderful Roddy McDowall. And bit of trivia, the name Vincent stands for, let's see if I can remember this, Vital Information Necessary Centralized, I believe is the abbreviation, which is, a bit of a mouthful. And then we have Ernest Borgnine, who, again, I'm not sure, but I think he might be an engineer, I think. And Anthony Perkins, who plays Dr. Durant, I think his name is, and he's kind of like the scientist of the crew. And together they're on the ship, and they're on an exploratory mission. I believe they're looking for extraterrestrial life. And they come across a black hole in space. And as they're scanning the black hole, they realize that there is a ship that's hovering just on the outer edge of the black hole that seems derelict. So two things strike them. One, why is the ship not being sucked into the black hole? How is it managing to just sit there? And two, why is it derelict? And they run scans of it, and they identify it as a ship called the Cygnus, which is of interest to Dr. Kate McRae because she explains that her father was on board the Cygnus, which was a research vessel. And the crew mysteriously disappeared, and they never knew what happened to the Cygnus. So she immediately wants them to investigate in the hope that her father is still on board and he's still alive. So they fly nearer to the Cygnus to get a closer look. And it's there that we get the first little action sequence of the movie, where the Palomino is caught in the gravitational pull of the black hole, and it's slowly dragging them in. And they manage, with the help of Vincent, to escape the gravitational field and fly back towards the Cygnus, which they realize that when they get near the Cygnus, the gravitational pull immediately disappears. Again, the Cygnus is giving off some sort of a force that's negating the black hole and enabling it to just stay in that position in space. And it's here that we get the first big wow moment of the movie. And it's this particular image that sort of burned on my brain from when I saw it back in the cinema, over 40 years ago. And it's where they're flying very close to the Cygnus to get a better look at it. And they're using a spotlight to look at the surface of the ship, and it's all very dark and quiet. And just as they're doing that, the ship suddenly lights up like a tree on Christmas morning, I think one of them says. And it's a real sort of wow moment because the model, that they built for this movie is just absolutely amazing. And the way it lights up, combined with the kind of matte paintings of the black hole and the space vista behind them, is just such a brilliant moment. And it really takes my breath away. And so there they kind of land. And to begin with, the ship seems derelict. And they eventually meet up with some of the guards that patrol the Cygnus, and these robots that are called, I think they're just called sentry robots or sentry guards. And they don't speak; they just march around, very stiffly. And I can remember having a couple of toy figures of these soldiers when I was a kid. I believe there was a toy line of figures made by the Mego company. And they made like little models of Vincent as well. And I wish I still had those figures because they're probably worth a bit of money, and they're quite collectible now. But anyway, I digress. So the sentry guards take the crew up to the command center of the Cygnus, which is an absolutely amazing set that Disney built, which consists of like a large kind of dome, half of a dome, that's really high, and then that combined with the matte painting behind it is very impressive. And it's in the control tower that they meet two characters that are kind of the antagonists of the film. The first one is Dr. Hans Reinhardt, played by Maximilian Schell. And the second one is his kind of bodyguard robot, which is this big hulking burgundy-looking thing called Maximilian. And much like Vincent, Maximilian doesn't have legs or wheels. He floats around. There's a lot of wire work in the movie, but it's really well done. And the design of the Maximilian robot still stands up today. I still think it's one of the best designed robots in science fiction history. It's just such a cool looking and an insidious looking thing. It's got like one single red slit for an eye. And he's just looks very menacing. So yeah, it's there that they meet Dr. Reinhardt, and he explains to them that the ship was previously damaged in a meteor shower and was almost derelict. And he ordered all the crew to evacuate the ship and return to Earth. But he would stay behind to try and get the ship working again and to continue his research on the black hole. And Dr. McCrae asks about her father, and he explains that unfortunately her father died during the meteor shower. So you can see that Robert Forster's character's feeling a bit uneasy about Dr. Hans Reinhardt, and he coldly tells him that they don't really want to stay. They just want to be there long enough to repair the ship, and so they can get back to Earth. But he can come with them if he wants to. But Dr. Reinhardt refuses. He wants to stay to continue his research, but he tells them that they can, scavenge their scrap pile for any parts that they may need. So a couple of members of the crew sort of go off in different directions to sort the Palomino out. And it's there that we begin to learn what really happened. Vincent meets up with another robot on board the Cygnus, which is kind of an older model of himself that's been battered and been given a hard life. And it's voiced by the actor Slim Pickens. And the name of the robot, everybody calls him Old Bob. And he kind of befriends Vincent, and the two of them get up to various things, which is one of the sequences that I really love, is where they come across a shooting gallery where the sentry guards are practicing on targets. And Old Bob explains that there's one sentry guard that's called Star, that's black. All the others are like a burgundy color, like Maximilian. But this one sentry guard is this black colored robot that's meant to be a really good sharpshooter. And Old Bob explains how, he's really good, but he's a bit of a poor loser. So Vincent takes him on at a game and has a game of like target practice with him. And it's just a great sequence where Star is doing his best to like look impressive and pull off all these trick shots. And then Vincent like says, "Hey, watch this." And he pulls like this like crazy move where he spins around and blasts all these targets. And in doing so, he either wittingly or unwittingly shoots Star with a ricochet of one of his shots.
Yeah, try this.
Which kills him. And I remember as he's like short-circuiting and powering down, Vincent like says, "If there's one thing I can't stand, it's a sore loser."
If there's anything I cannot stand, it's a sore loser.
And it's a great sequence. It's one of my favorite bits in the film. And yeah, so we start to learn what really happened on board the ship. And like Ernest Borgnine, he's wandering around the ship and he comes across a large botanical garden. And it's there that he sees one of the many like masked drones that are scattered around the ship that are like controlling the ship. You know, we see them sat at various consoles and they just move very slowly and they don't speak. So, you know, everyone assumes that they're just robots as well. But he notices one of these drones, and as it's walking away from him, it's limping, which he thinks is a bit odd. And we then cut to like Robert Forster's character, and he comes across some of the crew bunks, you know, some of the living quarters. And he sees that, you know, he goes into one of the quarters and all the clothes are still hanging up in the closet, which he thinks is a bit odd. You know, if they've left the ship, surely they took all their belongings with them. And then he sees what looks like some sort of a funeral service taking place, as like a coffin is ejected into space. And it's there that Maximilian catches up with him, you know, and appears behind him, you know, and obviously Maximilian doesn't speak, but you get the impression if he could speak, he'd say, "What are you doing here? You know, this area is not allowed." So, yeah, they start to notice weird things. And then old Bob explains to Vincent that the crew never escaped. The crew are, in fact, all the drones that they see everywhere. And that Dr. Hans Reinhardt killed Kate McRae's father. And he got all of the crew who were trying to mutiny and then got his sentry guards to like capture them and then put them through some sort of a mind control process to turn them into, that effectively lobotomizes them and turn them into the drones that is now using to control the ship. So, you know, immediately things take a dour turn, and once they learn this information, they just want to get off the ship as fast as they can. And it's at that point that Dr. Hans Reinhardt decides that he's going to go for it and drive the Cygnus into the black hole. And he switches off the field that's holding them in place. So, you know, the Cygnus is slowly starting to get pulled into the black hole. And Ernest Borgnine's character, he makes a beeline for the Palomino and attempts to fly it off the Cygnus to escape, because he just doesn't want to hang around any longer. And he does this before the repairs have taken place. So he ends up crashing it into the Cygnus and killing himself, which then leaves the remaining crew stranded aboard the Cygnus. And they come up with the idea that they can use a probe that we saw earlier in the movie that Dr. Hans Reinhardt had sent into the black hole to gather data and has then returned. So they think, well, we can get on board that and use that as kind of an escape craft. And we're then treated to the best part of the movie, which is an extended action sequence where the Cygnus is slowly getting nearer to the black hole, and it comes across a meteor shower that starts crashing into the Cygnus and smashing into it and, you know, causing all sorts of mayhem. And there's a particular sequence that's absolutely fantastic in terms of the quality of visual effects for, you know, what was the late 70s. I mean, this was like 25 years or so before CGI really took a hold in modern movies. So all the visual effects in this are like photochemically achieved. And there's a sequence where a meteorite crashes through part of the Cygnus and is rolling down this very long, large corridor. And part of the corridor, there's like a gantry that goes across the corridor. And members of the Palomino crew have to run across this bridge as this huge meteorite is rolling down towards them. And, you know, they manage to get across the bridge just before the meteorite hits the bridge and smashes it. And for the longest time, I'd watch this movie and think, how in the hell did they achieve that? Because it just looks so impressive. And suffice to say, I'm going to show you that entire clip now, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So I've jumped ahead a little bit, but I need to explain the scene in the movie that probably gave this film its PG certificate. And that's where Kate McRae learns through her telepathic link with Vincent the true fate of the crew of the Cygnus. And at this point, she's still up in the control tower with Anthony Perkins' character. And Anthony Perkins is, up to this point, is warming towards Dr. Hans Reinhardt as a fellow scientist. And he tells him that he'll take all of his research back with him to Earth, and he's happy to be the custodian of all of his work. But Kate McRae takes him aside and explains to him, this is what they've learned. The crew didn't evacuate. They're all here. They've been lobotomized. And Anthony Perkins thinks, no, that can't be right. And he walks up to one of the drones and spins the drone around in its chair and takes its mask off. And it's there that we see this gaunt, lifeless face of what was once a member of the crew. And as a 9-year-old, it's a bit of a scary moment, looking at it through your fingers. An interesting bit of trivia is that the gaunt, scary face of that crew member was actually the face of Gary Nelson, the film's director. So Anthony Perkins immediately thinks, well, stuff this, we're getting off this ship. And it's there that the Maximilian robot attacks Dr. Durant in quite a brutal way. And it turns out that Maximilian has like a series of rotating arms with different attachments on the end. And one of the attachments he uses at this point are like spinning blades, like propeller blades. And he comes towards Dr. Durant with these spinning blades. And Dr. Durant, to defend himself, holds up all of Hans Reinhardt's research papers. And you can see the blades just tear through these papers. And, we then move, the camera pans up to Anthony Perkins' face as the blades obviously are eviscerating his torso. And the violence isn't shown, but enough shown for your mind to fill in the gaps. And it's quite a horrifying sequence. And it's fair to say that it's that one bit that earned this movie its PG rating. And kudos for Disney for doing that, because it does give the movie like an elevation in tension and horror at that point that it needed. So, the action sequence with the meteors continue, and there's a good firefight that takes place with some of the sentry guards. And they end up in one of the botanical gardens that Ernest Borgnine saw earlier in the movie. And one of the meteorites grazes the ceiling of the botanical garden, which then causes all the atmosphere to get sucked out. So, there's a sequence involving that where they try and stop themselves being sucked out into space. And as great as this movie is, as we get to like the last 15 minutes, we begin to see cracks in the script. And by that, I mean that the movie takes some bizarre turns as we get towards the end of the movie. The first one is that we see that the Cygnus is destroyed to the point where, huge parts of it are exposed to outer space. And yet the crew still seem to be able to run around and, not be suffocated or sucked out into space. It's quite bizarre. It's as if the Cygnus has its own form of atmosphere from somewhere. And there's a sequence with Vincent and Maximilian where they have a fight and they finally meet head to head. And Vincent wins by drilling into Maximilian and short-circuiting part of his electronics, and Maximilian gets sucked out into space. I find it hard to use the word spoilers because the ending is very, very vague. And much like the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's fair to say that anyone that watches this movie will interpret the ending in a different way. So I'm going to just try and quickly explain what happens here. And then if you do watch this movie, I'd be interested to hear your interpretation of it. But as the ship is collapsing around them, the remaining members of the Palomino get on board this probe, and they manage to get off of Cygnus and escape. Dr. Hans Reinhardt is trapped in the control tower because a large screen falls off the wall onto him, and he's trapped underneath it. And the next time we see him, he's inside of the Maximilian robot. So he's wearing it like a suit, like an Iron Man, effectively. And the camera kind of pulls back, and we see that not only is he inside this robot, but he's on some sort of a rocky, fiery planet. Now, when I first saw this as like a 9-year-old, I just thought, oh, he's escaped by getting inside Maximilian so he can breathe. And he's ended up landing on a fiery meteorite or something. So I guess that's where he's going to be from now on. But, watching it as an adult, you think, is this meant to be a representation of his version of hell, and that he's actually died, but his hell will forever be trapped inside the body of Maximilian? It's just utterly bizarre. And then we cut to the Palomino crew in the probe as they're flying through the black hole, spinning end over end. And there we're treated to a sequence where we're sort of flying through a tunnel of mirrors with which I guess is meant to be some sort of an angel, as if we're getting the opposite vision of Dr. Hans Reinhardt, and now this is their heaven. But then the probe kind of comes through the black hole, and we see in the distance a planet that looks a lot like Earth. So, as a kid, and even now, I think that the Palomino crew went through the black hole, and it ended up being kind of a wormhole that took them back to Earth. So to all intents and purposes, they have survived and they've returned back home. But it is a bizarre ending, and you get the distinct impression, I don't know if this is the case, I've not read this, but I get the distinct impression that when they were making the movie, the script was unfinished. and they kind of cobbled together these bizarre sequences to kind of cap the movie off. And it's a shame, because up till that point, it's a very good science fiction movie. But as I say, the last kind of 10 or 15 minutes lets it down a little bit. But that being said, I would still say everything that comes before it makes it worthy of a science fiction classic, in my mind. I mean, you may disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. But if you haven't seen The Black Hole and you are a fan of science fiction films of that vintage, then perhaps give it a go. It's on Disney Plus, so you can watch it on Disney Plus. Unfortunately, it's only had a very limited Blu-ray release, which was only available via a special Disney Movie Club subscription, I believe. So copies are on eBay, but they are very expensive. So unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy. I only have a digital copy that I bought a few years ago. So I would hope that one day it will get a more wider release. I mean, I would love to see it on a 4K disc, but I very much doubt that will ever happen. I don't think Disney will be prepared to put the money into getting this movie remastered, really. And interestingly, there is talk of a remake. Of all the remakes we've had over the last few years, certainly this is a movie that deserves one. I think given the right filmmaker and the right treatment, this could be a very good movie. And there was talk that Joseph Kosinski, who did the Top Gun Maverick movie, was going to be doing the Black Hole remake. But the last I heard, the script was shelved because it started to have too many similarities to Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. So we'll see what happens with that, whether it does eventually get made. So there we are. That's The Black Hole from 1979. So thanks for watching. If you got this far and you did enjoy this movie, then please give me a thumbs up. And I'll see you on the next one.